One of my favorite runs in my trucking career was one I did when I was younger, and it was a run between Calgary, Alberta, and into the mountains of British Columbia. And back then, there were only two different ways you could go. You could go highway number one, or highway number 3. Now, it was always a beautiful drive, very scenic, no matter which route you took, but sometimes in the wintertime, it could be a pretty challenging drive as well. This video was sponsored by Lanefinder. Now, back when I was running through the mountains in British Columbia, this was in the early 1980s, I knew that they were starting to build a new highway, a big superhighway through the mountains. And they'd started that in 1984. But in 1985, my trucking career took a drastic turn. It turned out back then that the money was better running stateside. So that was what I went and did. I ran stateside. They completed the highway, this new superhighway, in 1986, but it would be a few years before I got to drive it and experience it. They completed this new highway in 1986. It was a marvel of highway construction, the biggest undertaken in North America up until that point. It was 4 lanes wide, 6 in some places, and they called it the Coquihalla Highway. The goal of this Coquihalla Highway, or the Coke that they called it, was to shorten the drive time between Calgary and Vancouver and make it a safer drive. The old highways that ran to Vancouver, Highway 1 and Highway 3, were both 2-lane winding roads. This Coquihalla was faster, and it was supposed to be safer. This new superhighway was 120 miles long. They built it in 20 months. It had 38 bridges, 37 different avalanche sheds. It took 1 million tons of asphalt and 2 million truckloads of gravel to complete. They worked on building this road in 20 months in the summer and in the winter. And you can't imagine how difficult it would be to work outside in British Columbia in the wintertime building a highway on the side of a mountain. It took 10,000 construction workers and involved another 16,000 additional personnel in offshoot jobs related to building the highway. As I had mentioned, one of the goals of building this new highway was to make it a safer passage through the mountains. But when you look at the accident statistics and the death toll statistics, it wasn't as safe as either one of the existing 2-lane routes through the mountains. Lanefinder is the ultimate job platform to help drivers find the jobs that they want. There are filters on the platform so that drivers can narrow down their search to find the carriers best suited for them. They can research the size of the carrier, where they run, what type of equipment that they have, all without having to talk to a recruiter. I'd highly recommend Lanefinder to help drivers find the best driving jobs out there. Check them out at lanefinder.com. Now, many of you will have seen the TV show Highway Through Hell. Well, this show, the highway they're talking about is the Coquihalla Highway, and the hell they're talking about is that highway in the wintertime. Drivers tend to get complacent going down the Coquihalla Highway, especially down from the summit. I think it's deceptive because it's 4 lanes wide, it looks like a smooth, straight road, and they tend to forget that they're in the mountains. The weather conditions can change, the altitude can change, and drivers all leave the top too quickly, looking around, but not paying attention to the drive. And the result of that is the Coquihalla Highway averages between 400 and 500 accidents every year, and many of them are fatal. The Coquihalla Highway is rated as one of the most dangerous roads in North America, particularly the hill from the summit down. Now, the summit, down the hill, the first 3 miles of that road are an 8% grade. Now, 8% grade is steeper than anything you'll find on Donner's Pass or going down Eisenhower on I-70 in Colorado. It's even steeper than the famous Wolf Creek Pass. Eisenhower, Donner, those are 6% grades. Even the Wolf Creek Pass never even gets to a 7% grade. The Coquihalla starts at the top with an 8% grade, and that's a lot of where the trouble starts because drivers leave the top too quickly, not realizing how steep that grade really is, and by the time they get down the first 3 miles, they're already in trouble. There's a runaway ramp there. A lot of them won't use it, but they're already rolling too quickly at the 3-mile mark, and they've got another 10 miles to go down the rest of the hill. This is probably a good time to mention that if you are interested or do a lot of mountain driving, check out my video on mountain driving tips. Now bear in mind, an 8% grade in British Columbia isn't considered particularly steep. I've driven on 18% grades in that part of the country, but 8% to BC is fairly normal mountain driving. After you get past the runaway lane, the rest of the hill, another 10 miles or so, is still a 6% grade. So it's still a serious hill, as bad as Donner or Eisenhower, the rest of the way down. So you've got to be careful all the way down. Don't get complacent and let your speed pick up. But the most important thing is not to leave the top too quickly. What I like to do is let the Jake do all the work. I leave the top of the hill and I stop at the brake check first. I better say this. Stop at the brake check first. Take advantage of that. Circle the truck, make sure everything is functioning properly, that everything is set up and looks good. I like to leave the top of the hill in about third gear with the Jake on full and let the truck just walk down on the Jake brake, hardly touching the brakes at all. Once you get down a little and the truck seems to be almost holding back too much with the Jake, you can pick up another gear. But still, let the Jake do most of the work. Touch the brakes occasionally. Remember to look in your mirrors for smoke. You don't want to smoke your trailer brakes. If they're not set up correctly, one could smoke and the rest not. But you've got to keep an eye on that all the way down, and don't get in a hurry to get down the hill. You can only go down the hill too fast one time. Something else drivers need to remember is the weather will change as you descend the hill. You're losing altitude, but different weather patterns are at different levels on the hill. Or you can come around the corner, a part will be shaded from the sun, and that part could be ice where the rest of the hill has just been wet. You've got to pay attention to the weather as well, all the way down. Don't assume that the hill is dry all the way to the bottom. Truckers are required to carry chains between October 1st and the end of April. So if you're going to be driving in British Columbia this winter, or in any of the mountain passes in any of the states, you've got to remember to be careful. It's not the pavement, it's not the roads that cause the accidents, it's the way people drive on them. And never assume that just because you're driving safely, you're not causing the accident, but you could still be involved in one, especially in the mountains in the winter, because people lose control, they're going too fast down the grade, you see an accident forming in front of you, you may not be able to get stopped in time, though it's not your fault, and the trucks behind you may not be able to get stopped in time either, and it's just one huge mess. I have many different stories from running in the mountains in the wintertime, and I really enjoyed it. I truly did. It was a test of skill and patience, but one of my favorite stories involved a friend of mine named Wayne Hunter. Wayne Hunter and I, years ago, were going westbound. We were going up the Rogers Pass. And it was bad, it was snowy. There wasn't any traffic really back then to speak of, but the snow was deep, the hill was steep, and we were chugging and churning our way up the hill. Now, back then in British Columbia, they didn't require you to put chains on at the bottom of the hills. The way everybody did it was they would climb as high up the hill as they could get until they spun out. Then they would put the chains on, and then they would carry on. So Wayne was in the lead, I was following Wayne. Wayne spun out in front of me. I got out, went around him, got maybe 100, 150 feet past him, and then I spun out. So we both locked up our brakes, got out, and started the chaining process. Well, back then in BC, and they still do this today, when they decide to take down an avalanche, they have a huge howitzer-style gun, almost a cannon, at the top of the hill, at the summit, and they'll shoot into an avalanche that will bring down the hill, bring down the snow on the hill, and put an avalanche across the road, and then they'll clean it up and plow it away. That's just how they do it out there. So I got my truck all chained up, and it was slow going, and I was lifting 110,000 pounds off a 6% grade, so it took some feathering. I eased it up, I got going, I got to the summit, the top of the Rogers Pass, and a trooper waved me down, like a Canadian Armed Forces guy, and said, are you the Richardson truck that was stuck on the hill? I said, yes. And he grabs his little microphone into his walkie-talkie and says, okay, he's off the hill, shoot. And I said, but wait, there's another truck stuck behind me. But it was too late. they'd shot off the cannon. They shot into the mountain. The avalanche came down. Wayne had snapped the chain when he started to get going, and he was still spun out down the hill. The avalanche came down the side of the hill. He heard it coming. You can hear it coming. It's a rumble. He knew enough to get into the truck. He was weighing 110,000 pounds gross, and this avalanche knocked the whole truck and trailer over about 3 or 4 feet, buried him up above the axles. So they had to bring out a D9 cat from Revelstoke, dig out the truck, dig out the road, and then tow Wayne up the hill. It was quite an experience, but that was typical mountain driving back then in the 80s. Take care, keep the rubber side down, be careful in the mountains. It's a little more dangerous out there, and I'll see you on the back haul.